as many of you know, President Hollande from France has come to India, and one of the things that will taking place will be further progress in cementing a deal between France and India on the question of nuclear reactors to be sold by Areva, a French firm now taken over by the government, to set up 6 nuclear reactors in Jaitapur on the western coast, on the Konkan region. This will be the single largest nuclear park anywhere in the world. And in spite of the opposition of the people in that region whose land will be taken away or whose livelihoods is going to be very badly affected. It's ironic that this deal is taking place, and I think it's important to understand that as far as nuclear energy projects are concerned, especially in this Indian context, India and a few other countries like China are really the only markets now for the development of nuclear energy. And this issue of nuclear energy development in India raises not just the issue of development or energy. It raises also 2 other issues: the nature of Indian foreign policy and the question of democracy. Because these reactors, not just at Jaitapur but in Kudankulam and elsewhere, are being pushed in spite of local opposition and being pushed in ways which have been deeply anti-democratic, so that you have a huge number of sedition charges and charges of waging war against the Indian people being leveled at ordinary Indian citizens who are carrying out utterly peaceful protests and demonstrations.
So I'd like to talk more specifically on the Jaitapur project and the information that Greenpeace has actually collected over a period on specifically the clearances that have been granted and the way conditions of those clearances have been violated when granting clearances to Jaitapur. So one of the main things that needs to be said here is that when the Jaitapur nuclear project was granted clearance, some conditions were laid down, and it was stipulated that these conditions have to be met within a 12-month period. Majority of these conditions were never met. However, clearance was granted for the site despite the fact that these conditions were not met within the stipulated period. Now, another important thing that needs to be considered here is a very important report that was commissioned by NPCIL. Basically, it's a Geological Survey of India report that was commissioned in 2002 and which then went on to get completed in 4 years' time in 2006. This report has some very important information on the seismicity of Jaitapur, of the region where Areva, the French company, is proposing to build this nuclear park, which as Achin said is the world's largest park. Now, this GIS survey report that NPCIL has commissioned clearly states that there are 16 fault lines in the whole Jaitapur site that has been proposed. Of this, the 6 fault lines are within the 5-kilometer radius. Now, this report that I am quoting is not in the public domain, and that's one of the questions that I want to put on the table. Why is such an important report that was commissioned by NPCIL?
Spell out NPCIL, just mentioned, the Nuclear Power Corporation
Limited. When the Nuclear Power Corporation Limited has commissioned this study and there was a conclusive report in 2006, they then started reviewing this report. And from 2006 to 2016 today, it's been 10 years and this report has been under review for 10 years. The report has not been made public at any point in time. We had actually accessed the report we got because we filed an RTI, which of course ran into a lot of trouble. But yes, finally we could get access to those the report in terms of a file inspection that was allowed by the Nuclear Power Corporation Limited. In the file inspection, we had all this information, but the NPCIL refused to kind of give us anything in writing or release the report. So one of the important things that I want to put in on the table here is when there is an AARB guideline which clearly says that, you know, even if there is a single fault line in a 5 kilometer within the site of a proposed site, then that site should not be considered for a nuclear power plant. Why this guideline is being violated by NPCIL, and then there is a report by the Geological Survey of India which clearly states that there are 16 such fault lines. Despite that, that report is being hidden, that report is being covered up, and clearances are being given, and you know, for an investment in Jaitapur. What needs to be understood also is that the community, the people living in and around the proposed site have been constantly agitating. There's a strong movement out there. People have been questioning this whole issue. Jaitapur falls in the Ratnagiri district, which is in the zone 4 seismicity. Again, this is according to the National Disaster Management Authority website. This whole district falls under zone 4. Still, NPCIL wants to keeps mentioning that Jaitapur falls under zone 3. So why is the government trying to fudge these figures? Why is it trying to hide reports that they themselves have commissioned, you know, which had you know, information which was detrimental to people and community and their lives? So this is a huge threat. If the seismicity in the region as cited in the survey is high, then why is the government risking people's lives, property, environment and all of this to invite foreign investment on the eve of the French president addressing this country? There are questions that not only the French president but also the government of our country needs to answer on this front.
The NPCIL stands for the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, which would be the government-owned operator of these nuclear power plants. Suppliers, of course, would come from Areva, the French firm. Also, the AERB stands for the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, which is supposed to monitor the functioning of the Atomic Energy Commission, which is the overall body in charge of all of these nuclear power plants. And ironically and shamefully, in fact, the AERB, the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, comes under the control of the very body that is supposed to independently monitor. And in fact, this Indian government, although it has been in this business for decades, has still not set up a completely independent regulatory or monitoring board.
The opposition to the nuclear power plants locally has highlighted very, very crucial issues. The issues have to deal with livelihoods, they have to deal with safety, they have to deal with the overall totally unaccountable, non-transparent, unsafe working culture in which the nuclear industry operates in India. They have to deal with the issues raised have to do with some inherent problems with the nuclear energy. The issues which the anti-nuclear movement in India has been raising have also to do with the absurdity of painting nuclear energy as clean and green and a solution for climate change. So when we talk about anti-nuclear movement in India, it has a range of issues, wide-ranging issues, and ultimately it has to do with democracy of India. It has to do with the kind of development that the people of India, the common people of India, the farmers, fisherfolk, they need. I would briefly add to what Priya said. Apart from the seismicity and other specific problem in Jaitapur, the problem is also related to the fact that in India we have no experience whatsoever in setting up and running these power plants. The EPR design, European pressurized reactors, 6 of them which the NPCIL is setting up, are designed by French company Areva. These are totally untested reactors. The only other place where Areva is constructing these reactors is Finland and China. In China, it has not even started, but in Finland, the Finnish government and its nuclear regulator has taken Areva to the court because in their country, the Areva's EPR project has run into double the cost and time overrun. And our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, went last year to Paris concluded the agreement with French company. On the same week, in the same week, just 2 days before Narendra Modi's visit, the French nuclear regulator itself, the ASN, which is the French nuclear regulator, it came up with a report of its post-Fukushima safety audit, and in that report it has scathingly criticized this particular design. In a place called Flamanville in France, Areva has been trying to construct the EPR. EPR is a very, very complicated design, and the French nuclear regulator has found problems, crucial safety vulnerabilities with the reactor pressure vessel of this particular design. So even the French nuclear regulator is not in a position to claim and to be assured about safety of this particular design. This is also a time in which Areva has run into a terminal financial crisis. Post-Fukushima, the entire global nuclear industry is facing a terminal decline. The decline started much before Fukushima, but Fukushima has exacerbated it because a number of countries post-Fukushima have opted to move away from nuclear energy and to opt for renewable and sustainable forms of energy sources. In that background, the crisis which Areva is facing, and the French utility EDF has now to take over some of the business of Areva. So Areva is in bad shape. The French nuclear regulator itself is criticizing this design, and India, ironically, is going ahead with the same design. Achin mentioned about AERB. AERB has no experience. It cannot vet for the safety of this particular design that India is bent on importing. So basically, we are joining the French nuclear ship which is sinking. It's also important to note that the French government last year in its overall energy transition policy has opted to move away from nuclear energy in the interim, and they have said that in the next 25 years they will reduce their reliance on nuclear energy from the current 75% to 50%. So the world's biggest nuclear industry, which is in France, and France has been the poster boy of global nuclear industry lobbies, itself is reducing its reliance on nuclear energy. Coming back to India, in India we have problems of regulation. Our AERB is not independent. We have problems, site-specific issues. So in Kudankulam, there are design-specific and site-specific issues. In Jaitapur, we have issues. In Jaitapur, thousands of fisherfolk are going to be displaced by this project. Thousands of fisherfolk, because these 6 EPRs would raise the local sea temperature by 5 to 7 degrees, which will make fishing in the area totally impossible. Also, the security apparatus which will come around the nuclear power plant will disallow fisherfolk from fishing in the 5-kilometer radius. So this means an immediate destruction of livelihood for at least 40,000 fisherfolk in these villages called Nate, Sakri Nate, and other fishing villages. So these people are constantly protesting. It's also important to highlight here that the people who get compensation for this project are only farmers. So farmers who are losing their land, some of them have got compensation, and fisherfolk have not got any compensation. They will lose their livelihoods immediately. What will also happen in Jaitapur, that the mango cultivators, Jaitapur is located in Konkan, which is a biodiversity hotspot of India. It's actually one of the 10 biodiversity hotspots in the entire world, and we have world's famous Alfonso mangoes there. Thousands of Alfonso cultivators are going to be affected because their export license to some of the European countries will get terminated. European countries have very stringent specifications, and they don't import Alfonso or any edible products from areas which have nuclear power plants. So their business is going to be affected. Then there are another thousands of people who are engaged into supplying equipments, who are engaged into supplying services to this agro business and the agrarian community. So it has a large implication. on the people in the surrounding area in Jaitapur. Jaitapur, Konkan are very, very fragile ecologies. We have also had this entire battle where government's own committee on the Konkan area have highlighted how vulnerable it is and how rich is the biodiversity in Konkan. But the previous government constituted yet another committee under the former ISRO chairman, and he said no, everything is fine. So it's nuclear plus other several power plants in that region which are going to affect the entire Konkan region. So these are issues which are at stake today. So as we speak here today, it's important to highlight that on 26 January, on India's Republic Day, the duty of the government should be to protect the interests of the common Indian people. Last year on 26 January, the same government effectively surrendered Indian people's right to sue the nuclear suppliers because President Obama was here. And this year we are hearing that they will further this disastrous nuclear deal with France. So it's very unfortunate. The people of India, the citizens of India are not going to accept this. These nuclear agreements are totally unacceptable for this to us, and our protest will continue. We'll make sure that this the people of India, the common people, farmers, fisherfolk, they don't have to meet with accident and the disastrous consequences of this insane nuclear expansion that the government is undertaking.
One of the important reasons why the Indian government is going along with this is the fact that France, Russia, the United States, they were all supposed to help India get passage through the nuclear suppliers group for the importation of various nuclear related materials, and therefore the Indian government had to have a kind of payoff to them. And one of the payoffs with regard to the French and the Russians and the Americans was, of course, these commercial deals. Hence the significance that is being attached to this particular sale, as well as to the others with Russia and the United States.
Very commonsensical questions of this government. First of all, as Sundaram pointed out, it's extremely ironic and reflects on the travesty of democracy that on Republic Day, when we remember the Constitution and Ambedkar, and we think of equality, fraternity and liberty and rights of people, when we think of economic and social rights, when we think of the articles that empower us to seek information and get it, for all of us who seek social justice, that on that particular day, the government of India enters into a deal which is both secretive against its own people in terms of what will happen to people in Jaitapur. It's also following a plan of development in which it looks at not people's benefit, not people's growth, people's rights, but at propping up a falling and inept foreign company called Areva. Now, if this is the kind of present we are going to get on Republic Day from our Prime Minister, it's a statement on Indian democracy and governance. It is appalling that information relating to nuclear plants and to the kinds of impact it will have is not made available to people who live in that area. If the Constitution prevails, if the government is serious about governance, if the right to information law is actually in place, if all of us as citizens have a right to see that safety comes first before anything else, Jaitapur and its citizens have a right, and we all have a right along with them, to know exactly what will happen if the plant begins and this nuclear park is established, exactly how many of these fault lines are possibly going to cause huge earthquakes, how many people will lose their lives, what will happen to them. It is the extraordinary callousness of this deed that really shocks me today, because every life is valuable. And if this country has to progress, it has to progress protecting its people and have a development which is kind, which is compassionate, and which allows for growth with humanity and justice. So all this is completely unacceptable. At the level of the right to information, there is an override in the Act which says whatever information impacts the life of citizens, there is an override which says such information should be brought out into the public domain. if this information is not brought out, I think we should consider going to the High Court to demand that this information, to which we have already had access, is definitely going to impact the lives of many people in that particular area, and potentially this information should be is of a very crucial nature and should be made public. And I think we should go to the Delhi High Court or whichever High Court we can and look at it and see whether there's possibility of getting that information. I also think that there should be a big debate on energy needs. We've been saying this since the days of Kudankulam, but I really think that the people of India should now, since they're all getting more and more literate because of access to so much knowledge, insist that there be a huge energy discussion and debate on what kinds of energy we need and what are the sources of energy which do not have side effects, and why we do not develop such energies, and why is it that business becomes more important than even energy. Business becomes more important than the lives of its own citizens. Business becomes more important than politics. It's overwhelming us. So we really need to know, particularly about nuclear energy and in relation to it, all energy, what are the alternative development plans we can have. We also have to fight, I think seriously now, all of us come together on a common platform to say that this kind of governance is unacceptable, this kind of deciding and decision making in which people's well-being is not considered is unacceptable, and in fact the development agenda should be actually placed before every district council, should be placed before the state government, and then every particular state government must give its approval. I really think we have to take an aggressive and much larger position to really protect all ourselves, including the impact nuclear energy is going to have in Jaitapur. I think that the governance has really reached an all-time low in our country today.
Against nuclear energy, which then express themselves in very specific ways in different contexts, like for example India. Basically there are 6 arguments against nuclear energy anywhere, and they are as follows. First, too little. The peak of the contribution of nuclear energy to world electricity was 17% reached in the 1990s, mid-1990s. Today, it is down to 11%. And despite the fact that China, India and a few other countries are going ahead, because many more reactors are going to end their lives and wind down, this is going to go down in the next 10-15 years to 8% and then further down and down. In other words, the countries which are selling nuclear reactors and equipment, etc., are themselves moving away from it. So, too little. Second, too late. The argument is that nuclear energy is very, very necessary because it is clean energy, and we need that in the context of global warming. This is a complete misrepresentation. Yes, it is correct that nuclear plants, once established, emit less than 1% of carbon emissions. However, this doesn't take into consideration that in the construction of those plants, something like 60% of carbon emissions will take place. And, of course, the whole problem of radioactive waste and so on. And even if you think that there is some saving, I think it's very, very important that 30% or so. It's also very, very important that the lifespan of building a reactor is something like 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, and so on. And it is necessary to reduce carbon emissions, not just a great deal, but to do it as quickly as possible. And if you were to take that money which is spent on building a nuclear reactor, which will come up after 10 years, and you were to spend it on renewable energy sources, you will reduce much more carbon emissions much faster. So don't be swayed by this particular argument about the global warming issue. Third, it is too secretive and therefore deeply undemocratic. India has one of the most secretive of laws, but whenever you're dealing anywhere in the world with nuclear energy, it is always secretive. Even in countries like the United States, which have much more transparent rules and so on, after things are wound down, after the plant is shut down, you will suddenly get reports 2 or 3 years later that there were radioactive leaks here, there, and everywhere. So in fact, this is extremely secretive. In India, it's much worse. And as for the question of democracy, when you have peaceful protesters who are being killed and beaten and jailed and charged with outrageous charges like sedition and so on, what does it say about the character of Indian democracy? Fourth, it is too centralized. Everywhere, people are recognizing that we need to have much more decentralized forms related to renewable resources of very kind for energy development and so on. And of course, the whole question of nuclear energy only really makes sense when you're talking about a highly centralized system of energy production and so on. When anywhere people who realize the importance of nuclear, of renewables, recognize the importance of a different kind of economic development pattern and program, you have to move towards that. Fifth, of course, it is too expensive. In spite of the fact that the government subsidizes it, which is why, incidentally, France has had 70%, because any number of costs, a huge proportion of costs, have been subsidized and never come out by the French government everywhere. In spite of these subsidies, it remains most expensive. In the Indian case, if the cost of providing nuclear energy from other sources, including coal and others, and of course renewable sources, the prices are coming down, is something like between 2 or 3 rupees per kilowatt hour per unit to something like about 6, 7, 8 in the case of solar and so on. Jaitapur, it is going to be rupees 16 to rupees 20 per unit. And that is not counting various subsidies that are taking place here. So it is far too expensive. Incidentally, this is the most important reason why countries like the United States and elsewhere are moving away from it, is because it is simply too expensive. So it's not as if they're moving away because they've got concern for capitalists involved in the question of nuclear energy have got concern. It's because it's just not worth it. And finally, of course, it is too dangerous. It is too dangerous because of the insoluble problem of what to deal with radioactive waste. It's too dangerous in terms of what could happen if there is an accident. It's too dangerous in terms of what could happen if there is an earthquake. It's too dangerous in so many ways. It could be a target of an attack and so on. So for all of these 6 reasons, nuclear energy is most certainly not the way to move ahead. Let me end by thanking our 3 presenters here, Aruna ji, Priya and Kumar Sundaram, for coming here today and giving this presentation to inform all of you. Thank you very much.